Welcome, I'm Dulwakoa, and you're listening to the Dear Diaspora podcast. Dear Diaspora exists to host meaningful Africa-centered conversations about all things culture, business, mental health, politics, and more. Join me and guests as we ask the big questions, challenge narratives surrounding Africa, learn and unlearn, and explore what a more connected, collaborative, and engaged African diaspora can look like. Hello, everyone. Welcome to season 4 of the podcast. It feels so good to be back. Before I get into anything else, if you are brand new here and this is your first time listening, thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you enjoy the content. My name is Ndulwakoa. I am Zambian American. I was born in Lusaka, Zambia, but grew up in Omaha, Nebraska. So I've lived here for 16 years now. I identify as an Afro-optimist, and during the day, I work as a Princeton and Africa Fellow for an organization based in Accra, Ghana, called Emerging Public Leaders. To folks who've been listening for a while, hello again. Thank you for coming back. I know it's been a minute, but I'm so glad again to be back. The last episode that I put out, I shared a bit about what was happening at that time. So I got some news from, my family back home, and it just was tragic news. And unfortunately, I had to travel for my uncle's funeral. And so my plan was to be in Zambia for just about maybe 6 weeks. And I went back, I spent time with my family, and I decided that I just did not want to leave. So I ended up staying back home for 4 months, and that's been the longest amount of time I've ever spent back home. I think it's so interesting to travel back home as you get older because you start to just see more, and the view you have of your home country is just less through those rose-colored glasses, and you just see your home country for what it is. And so I feel like I definitely came back to the US with a more just informed, nuanced perspective on a lot of things. And I'm excited to dig into all of that later in the episode. So before we get into all of that, I want to share just a bit about the direction I'd like to take this podcast in moving forward. Dear Diaspora is going back to the basics, and this is going to be a platform for intimate, honest, educational, and hopefully entertaining Africa-centered conversations. And what this means is you can expect conversations beyond entrepreneurship and innovation. I want to create space to talk about things like mental health, identity, language, and culture. Essentially, I want to address different topics all from an Africa-centered lens. You've probably also noticed a few changes in the look and the sound of the podcast. Shout out to all of the amazing collaborators I've had the pleasure of working with these past couple months. And a special shout out to my cousin Hicks, who is now the official Dear Diaspora audio engineer. And Hicks is so awesome. He reached out to me a few months back and was like, hey, do you need support, any sort of audio support with your podcast? And I was like, yes, absolutely. Let's do it. Also, another shout out to Yellow Ray Digital for helping me stay consistent on social media. I really appreciate your support and your expertise. Dear Diaspora is truly a collaborative effort, and it's so nice to not be doing this all by myself. With that said, if you would like to support the show and the amazing folks behind the scenes, you are more than welcome to show us some love and some support by buying us a coffee. Check out the link in the show notes for the link to that. Buy Me a Coffee is essentially a platform where you can support your favorite creators and creatives. buymeacoffee.com/Dear Diaspora, I believe is the link. So check that out and be as generous as you would like to be. And yes, you will totally get a shout out if you buy us a coffee. And I believe you can also buy coffees anonymously. So completely up to you. I also really want to add like a Q&A or listener focused segment to the show. So for now, I am very open and I have dropped a link in the episode description that just says like ask me a question. So you can go on there and essentially ask me about anything. It doesn't necessarily have to do with like, Africa or the diaspora, but if there are like certain maybe relationship questions you have or decision-making issues you might be having at the moment, or maybe you're having a hard time staying motivated and keeping track of your goals. Like if there's anything that's kind of related to that, I am open to your questions. And the plan so far is to give you essentially like my not so expert advice. And I also want to be able to say like, hey y'all, next week's episode is going to be about navigating relationships in your 20s and 30s. So that would be another way essentially for y'all to drop your questions ahead of time so that the expert that I'll have on that'll talk about relationships can address some of your questions. So that is the plan for now. Happy to answer any questions you might have. But again, just check out the link in the description, drop your questions, and we can go from there. Also, just be warned that the link is a question wave link. You don't have to submit your name, your email, so all the questions will be anonymous, but they will be visible so everyone can see the question that you submit. So just be mindful, I guess, if there's anything that you would drop in there that would be like too personal or something that you wouldn't feel comfortable with other people seeing. Okay, so it is time to dig in to the 4 best and worst moments of my time back home earlier this year. So as a quick reminder, I spent pretty much like late December of 2020 through April of 2021 in Lusaka, Zambia, mostly at my grandma's house. And that was quite an adventure. I just got to see Zambia in a different light, especially being there for that long. If I had another opportunity to do it over, stay home for that long, I absolutely would do it. No regrets. I actually wanted to stay much longer, but things were getting a bit tricky with like my visa, and I'll get into that because unfortunately, because I'm like a US citizen, I, have to get a visa when I travel, and I'm trying to work on that. You'll hear more about that later in the episode. So here are the 4 best and worst moments of my time back home. So the best moment was hands down spending time with my grandmother and even getting dating advice from my grandmother. This visit was just much different. I really, really got to spend some quality time with her and just learn more about who she was as a woman, like pre-children, pre-grandchildren, and all of the wisdom that I gained from each moment that I spent with her was just amazing. Like I could not put a price on that. Each time she, would say something or, drop a little gem, I would just rush to like my phone, put it in my notes. And it was always just so, I guess, just so enlightening or mind-blowing, thinking like, oh wow, like my grandma's for real, like dropping gems and just sharing more of herself and just being really vulnerable. And I really, truly appreciated her and the fact that she did that. And so the biggest piece of advice that she gave me, which was really interesting, was that, first of all, before I even dig into the piece of advice, she very much, although, we grew up very Christian, very Seventh-day Adventist, this advice that she gave me, not to paint her in like a bad light at like in any way, But this advice she gave me was very modern and it was very like unexpected. Like I would think she would, be very like traditional and cautious in like, the things that she would tell me and kind of old school. But she was like, after you've been on a few dates with a guy, maybe 2, 3 dates, go to his house. And I was like, Grandma, wait, what are you telling me to do? Um, and essentially, what she was saying was go to his house and see how he lives. Check out his living situation, the environment that he's in. Does he clean up after himself? Is he tidy? Is he organized? And basically, she said, if that isn't the case, and you notice that this person is just does not pay attention to just making sure his space is like well taken care of, run away. That is a huge red flag and is essentially an indicator that your future with him is just, it might not be bright. And so that was really interesting to me because I wouldn't think that she would tell me go to someone's house. But she was like, yeah, girl, like you got to see it early. You got to know what you're getting into. And I will never forget that piece of advice. And now I'm thinking back to how cute she looked. We were at this super bougie cafe called Three Trees in Lusaka. She was dressed really nice, and we were just having the best time chatting it up about all things dating. And she told me about my grandpa and like their relationship, their marriage. Like it was such a moment, and I so wish I could do it over. It was hands down like one of the best moments of my time back home. The absolute worst moment of my time back home was essentially getting scammed by folks that I considered friends. Here is a little bit of backstory. So I was about like 2 months into my stay back home, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I need to get back to Dear Diaspora. Let me at least meet some people, maybe schedule some interviews. And then I thought to myself, when else am I really going to be, or when next am I going to be in Africa, on the continent? And so I was like, let me actually schedule some interviews and talk to people like in person. And I had the idea to actually film a few interviews, and it all just started to make sense. And I was like, absolutely, I am going to do this. I had, read about and heard about some really cool up and coming and even more established Zambian businesses that I thought would be just a perfect fit for the podcast. And so I began like doing my outreach, and regarding like the video filming, I was like, oh, like I already had this team in mind because they were my friends. We literally like grew up together, like same neighborhood, same church, and I'm going to stop right there. So I don't, I'm not name dropping or anything. So yeah, I like identified the video team that I would want to work with because I had seen their work and I knew that they always do a good job. They've worked with several international clients, local like Zambian clients, and I trusted that they'd be able to do a good job essentially. So we set everything up. We pick like really beautiful locations to host these interviews. And the interviews, like the day of, like they go well. Like I'm actually like interviewing some of Zambia's most notable entrepreneurs. And it's just the coolest thing to me, right? So we finish up the interviews and we wrap them up. And to me, I was just like, oh my gosh, like this was perfect. I was really excited to get to a point where we are reviewing the videos and editing and just getting everything together. And so prior to the edits and stuff being made, I had made a 50% deposit so that they could actually do the filming, right? And after the filming was done, one of the guys on the team reached out to me and essentially was like, oh, hey, the editor needs some sort of advance. Like, he's not going to be able to get started without the second payment. And to me, I was like, that's a little strange. Like, why would I make the second payment if the project is not complete and it's not done? And so essentially, I was like, okay, this is a little bit sketchy, but I know these guys, I trust these guys, I believe they're doing a good job. So I go ahead and I make the second payment, which, when you think about it, it is the biggest or the most obvious no when you're doing business with anyone. Like, you do not pay the full price or make, a full deposit before the work is complete. But I did so, and it turned out to be one of the worst decisions I had made, at least during the time I was back home. Let me not be too dramatic. And so I pay the second deposit, and all of a sudden, of course, I kind of get ghosted. I keep following up and I keep saying, hey, where are my videos? Like, where do we stand? Like, have we made any progress? And things just become just very sketchy. Like, the guys are being very dodgy. They're not communicating. They're taking forever to like respond to my messages and things. And so I didn't want to believe it at the time. They took advantage of me, or they like, it just seemed really weird for me to think that that was intentional. But I've come to learn, like, these past few months, that it might have been intentional. And so, yeah, like, they keep dodging my calls and I keep following up. And it gets to the point where, so we did the filming mid to late March, and I was scheduled to leave Zambia in April. It got to the point where I literally had maybe 3 days left in Zambia, and I still hadn't seen any of my videos. And so I call one of the guys and I say, like, hey, if you don't give me my videos, like, I'm calling the police, essentially, because this looks like a very obvious scam. And so I call them, I threaten them with the whole police thing. And of course, they start scrambling. They start, saying, oh, like, this isn't what it is. Like, we've just, we're a little behind schedule. Like, we got you, we got you. Like, we're going to send you the videos. Like, I'm going to send you a video right now. So he sends one video, and it is like, y'all, I was crushed. Like, I was so disappointed. He didn't tell me, like, maybe he didn't have the camera set up correctly, but like the overall look of the video, like, it wasn't great. Like, it almost looked, I don't want to say blurry, but it did not look like sharp at all. Like, the picture quality or the video quality wasn't great. The sound wasn't that great. And I just, y'all, I was so disappointed when I saw that first video, and it hadn't even been edited how I requested. And so they send me that video. I'm like, okay, this isn't what I asked for. And they keep saying, oh, like, we'll make the changes or whatever, and we'll send the rest of the videos. Mind you, I ended up interviewing 5 entrepreneurs total. And like I mentioned earlier, like, these were like notable entrepreneurs. One of Zambia's biggest influencers, like Lulu Hangala, like, she's awesome. I don't know if she's going to listen to this episode, but shout out to you, Lulu. And so it's like I filmed these interviews, and I had absolutely nothing to show for them. And I still do not have anything to show for them. So I get back to the US, and I continue, and I, continue to say, if you can't send me my stuff, give me a refund. And he's like, oh, like, we're going to send you your stuff. We're going to, sorry about the delay. It just keeps going on for months, even after I come back from Zambia and I'm back in the US. Yeah, so it was a super disappointing experience. And so what I said to them was like, okay, just give me my money back, because this is just literally not going anywhere. I ask for my money back, and I get a partial refund. So maybe I wouldn't even say it was 20%. of the amount. It might have been like 10 to 15% of the total amount that I paid. And I still don't have the rest of my money. I have attempted to involve the police again, but that again has just been difficult, like trying to coordinate, communicating with the police officers and having them try to communicate with the guys. It's been a mess. And it was really a disappointing experience given that those guys, like I knew who they were, like I know them, I trusted them, and I just felt so used. And so the biggest lesson from that, like obviously, whenever you're doing any sort of business with anyone, certainly don't pay the full amount before all the work is done. That's like, that's a basic thing, like business 101. But then also getting it in writing, I think would have helped as far as, some of the issues that I've had with like getting the police involved and things like that. Yeah, it was like done informally essentially because I knew the guys and I was like, okay, whatever, like contracts, maybe not necessary. But I could see now, like, if I wanted to actually escalate this a bit more, something like that would have helped. Yeah, I do have like all the records of the transactions and the money that I sent over to them though. So I do have that, but I played a role in that for being a little bit too trusting and maybe not doing my due diligence. But then again, like, how do you even do enough research to know, like, okay, you might potentially get like scammed or the work isn't just going to be done? Yeah, so that was one of the worst moments of my time back home. And it really just taught me to be way more protective of myself, my energy, because what I noticed and what I think a lot of Africans in the diaspora who go back and visit back home notice is, people do look at you differently because, living in the West, people think that, you're made of money essentially. And people just think like maybe not to take you as seriously. I ran into that multiple times. Thankfully, I wasn't scammed by anyone else, but there were lots of moments where people literally would just walk up to me and say, oh, give me money or give me $20. So not the best feeling in the world. But yeah, I learned my lesson. And I think the biggest or another lesson was just not to romanticize things, period. Don't romanticize Africa. Don't romanticize people, because at the end of the day, people are flawed regardless of, where you're from. Like, you're gonna experience good things, you're gonna experience bad things, you're gonna be frustrated, you're gonna have joyful moments. And I think going back home with that type of mindset is certainly super helpful, because then you're like, you kind of snap yourself out of this whole like, oh, I'm going back home and it's gonna be so dreamy and I'm gonna reconnect with family and with my friends and I'm gonna see, my old elementary school and my old neighborhood, and I'm gonna walk to the market and I'm gonna see my old friends. Like, yes, it's like this very nostalgic thing and this very just, yeah, it's a special moment. But I think, especially for me, who thinks so fondly of my childhood and growing up in Zambia, I think it's important to take those rose-colored glasses off and just see the country and see Zambia for what it is, because I think you're less likely to run into certain issues because you're maybe overly trusting or you're romanticizing certain situations and not really seeing them for what they are. So yes, that's another big takeaway. Just do not romanticize Africa. Don't romanticize anything, period. In case you're wondering, most of the entrepreneurs I interviewed were super understanding and super willing to reschedule. And I actually, like this season for sure, there is an episode that's already done and recorded with an awesome woman founder who happens to run one of Zambia's like fastest growing sustainable furniture companies. So I cannot wait to share that episode, so be sure to look out for that one. Okay, so those two were the best and worst moments. And now I'm going to share the second best and the second worst moments. Okay, so second best moment was getting a real taste of Zambia's nightlife. I spent most of my time in Lusaka, the capital, and it was just amazing. I had such a good time. There were no misses, essentially. And if you are ever in Lusaka and need recommendations on places to go, I am happy to make those, and I am happy to connect you to people that I know. And I have to give a shout out to one of my favorite places. It was called Granddaddy's. I had actually heard about Granddaddy's like on social media, Twitter specifically, like people would always be talking about it. And I was like, oh my gosh, I gotta go see this place. It's essentially this like outdoor bar type situation. And, you know, like on the side, they're like grilling meat and like barbecuing and stuff. And the music's good. You know, the DJs are always on point. And so I just had such a great time at Granddaddy's. And it was always just nice to spend time with friends there. And then also like kind of low key, just people watch, because everyone's usually like dressed to the nines and just looks absolutely amazing when they go to Granddaddy's. So I highly recommend that place if you're ever in Lusaka as well. The final moment I'm going to talk about, and this is categorized as the second worst moment, if that's even like a thing. So it was the moment I essentially like had to start my locs all over when I was attempting to get a Zambian ID. So it all started because I had stayed way past my visa limit. I actually kind of got in trouble with that, and thankfully we were able to resolve it. But you know, because I'm a US citizen, whenever I travel, I have to get a visa essentially. And if you decide to extend your stay while you're in Zambia, you actually have to notify immigration every 30 days. And then like the maximum amount of days you can stay in Zambia is 90 days. And so I sort of knew that, but then I didn't realize that you had to tell immigration that you decided to extend your stay essentially. And so once I reached I almost reached that 90-day mark, I went to immigration and they essentially were like, oh, like, we're going to arrest you. And I literally thought they were joking. And I was like, oh, like, you know, there must be some sort of mistake. You know, I'm just coming here to let you know that I've stayed almost 90 days and I want to like let you know that I'll be leaving pretty soon or whatever. But yeah, they were like, that is illegal. You can't do that. You're supposed to notify us. And it became this whole thing, y'all. Thankfully, I did not get arrested. I didn't get in trouble. I was able to, you know, get in touch with like family and stuff, and they were able to help me resolve that. But yes, heads up to anyone that travels to their home country, like be sure to look into those, I guess, like the fine line and those fine details, especially when it comes to like, you know, immigration and things. Like definitely do not take those things lightly. So anyway, while I was in Zambia, I was like, okay, I do not want to have to keep applying for visas when I travel to Zambia because, you know, this is my home and it would be great to be able to just travel and not have those sort of restrictions in place. And so essentially to be able to do that, you have to become like a dual citizen. And so I began the process to become a dual citizen of Zambia. And one of the things that was required was getting an ID, like a national registration card. And so I had started the process of getting the card, and I found out pretty early on that I wouldn't be able to get my picture taken because I had started my locs. So that's another update. Like, I started my locs in February, and they were like, you can't take the photo for your ID while you have locs. And so I pretty much had no options. And they were like, these are the rules. We don't make exceptions. And so I'm like panicking, like I'm calling like friends and stuff, and I'm asking, I'm like, okay, what do I do? Like, do I really have to take out my locs? And thankfully, one of my friends, Natasha, she also has locs, and she was like, well, I technically had to get permission from my dad when I was ready to get my ID, like when I was a teenager. And she was like, what you can do is maybe just comb out the front of your locs and then just tie them back so it looks like you have your natural hair. And to me, I was very upset because I had already had my locs for almost 2 months, and they were, starting to lock up. And I essentially had to like comb them out in the front. And to me, it didn't make sense, like I was actually quite upset because the rule is you have to wear your natural hair in your ID. And locs technically do not count as natural hair. And I haven't read like the actual laws like about it, but that's just the standard. Like, you cannot do that. And, if you have like, blonde hair or your hair is like dyed pink or whatever, you're also not allowed to get your picture taken. Yeah, but funny enough, if your hair is relaxed, you are fine and you can take your picture and you can get your ID picture taken that way, which to me, that's not natural because your hair is chemically changed and straightened. But I wanted to be really frustrated in that moment, and I was. But then like my grandma's cousin essentially was like, you know what, the rules are the rules. No one's going to make exceptions for you. And that kind of hit me because I was like, oh shoot, like I feel like very kind of privileged and very like, almost like dismissive of like, oh, like, well, those are the laws, they shouldn't be that way. And so yeah, essentially like, my grandma's cousin, he like humbled me a little bit. And I totally saw where he was coming from. But then on the other side of it, I am all about laws that make sense considering our culture and just the different ways women choose to wear their hair. So yeah, it wasn't like a battle I was willing to die on. And so I complied and brushed out the front of my hair and that's just what I had to do. I got my ID picture taken and essentially was able to get the process for like my dual citizenship started. So yeah, that was the second worst. It may seem like trivial to some, but hair is, so important. And I was so excited to start my loc journey, and then to have to like just take them out and kind of start over was a little bit traumatizing. I'll have to say that. So that was the second worst moment, but we are over that. I'm happy to hopefully be a dual citizen soon. All in all, I had such a good time back home. And like I mentioned earlier, if I had the chance to do it again, I so would. I would stay longer in the future, just depending on, what I end up doing. But yes, I'm so thankful for that time. I'm so grateful I got to be with my grandma during like a really difficult time for her. I'm so glad I got to be there for my family and that I got to reconnect with my friends. I got to see more of Zambia, enjoy the nightlife, get a sense of what it's like to actually live in Zambia, and really just learn more about my country and see what's possible. I definitely left Zambia just feeling more hopeful about the future and just more hopeful about different ways I can remain connected to the country. Like, obviously, I have family there, but I do have intentions to continue to travel to Zambia, get more people to travel to Zambia, hopefully in the future, and do business in Zambia, invest in Zambia, things like that. So it just gave me just a different perspective and a realer perspective. And so if you are someone in the diaspora and maybe you haven't been back home in a while and your work happens to be remote, I highly recommend spending an extended amount of time back home just to kind of have a realer picture of the place you're from. It certainly just changed my outlook. It changed my life, really, and I'm thankful for it. Speaking of Zambia and Zambia's future, you are more than welcome to check out a blog post that I put together for my fellowship organization covering Zambia's recent election and the role that young people played in it. I really enjoyed putting it together, and if you check it out, it has basically like a rundown of like what led to the ousting of former President Edgar Lungu and the election of our brand new president, Hakainde Hichilema. I will also add that link to the episode description. Feel free to check that out. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Dear Diaspora. I am so excited to share more episodes with you in the next few months. So episodes are going to be out bi-weekly moving forward. So every 2 weeks on Tuesdays, you will get a new episode of Dear Diaspora, at least through the end of the year. So be on the lookout for those. Share this with a friend. If you haven't already, also follow Dear Diaspora on social media. We're active on all the main social media platforms, mostly Instagram and Twitter. So you can find us on Instagram at Dear Diaspora and on Twitter at Dear Diaspora Pod. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. Share this with a friend. And don't forget, if you'd like to support the show, you are more than welcome to do so. And you can do that by buying us a coffee. The link to that is also in the description. Talk to y'all soon.